every third Monday of the month at 6 p.m. Second Life time or Pacific time for you folks in real life. We meet mystery authors and others from the publishing world to talk about books and the issues facing them today from social and technological change. And there's certainly been a lot of those lately. I'd like to thank Drax Dupre, host of the Second Life Book Club and the Drax Files Radio Hour, broadcast from Second Life, for his sponsorship and use of the Book Club Island in our previous shows. I'd also like to thank Strawberry Linden and Brett Linden for their help in setting this show up. And finally, my eternal thanks to Becky Hansen and Isabel Charon for all their technical assistance in making this happen. Without you, it wouldn't have been possible. A special thanks to Isabel for getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning her time to run the camera. Now, our regular viewers may notice that we're no longer on Book Club Island. The reason for that is there's a lot going on over there these days, and setting up for our show is becoming a bit of an effort. So we decided to set up our own studio. And I'll talk more about this at the end of the show about what it means for our future broadcasts. Now, let me introduce tonight's guest, Gary Earl Ross, author of the popular Nickel City Mysteries. Gary is also an award-winning playwright, as well as professor emeritus at SUNY Buffalo. He was just quoting Chaucer in Middle English to us. He's also, full disclosure, Gary sits with me on the board of directors of the New York chapter of Mystery Writers of America, which is where I first met him. Gary, welcome. How does it feel to be in Second Life?
I'm a newbie as far as Second Life goes, so it's interesting. There are things I wish I would stop doing, like tapping my foot, but I'm afraid to interfere, lest I mess up the thing completely. But don't worry about it. Thank you for having me.
Oh, we're very happy to have you, especially with your being an Edgar Award winner. We've had a couple of Edgar Award winners on before, but they were book reviewers. You're the first actual author creator. And could you tell us, yes, could you tell us a little, please, about the Edgar Award for being a playwright? I understand, if I understood you correctly when we were preparing for the show, you were the last person to receive that award.
No, not for playwriting.
Okay, I'm sorry.
There were a few more afterward, and then they discontinued the award, or they put it on hiatus, which I think is problematic because mystery plays are a wonderful, wonderful experience, and putting a mystery on stage engages an entire audience. And I've had most of my plays. I've had 9 plays produced. Of the 9, 7 are mysteries in one sense or another. So, but I think mysteries on stage are wonderful because they engage an entire audience.
Well, that used to be a fairly common entree into theater.
Yes.
I think of Mousetrap by Agatha Christie. When I lived in London years ago, that was still going on there for I don't know how many decades. I think it might even still be going on.
I think it still is. I think it's the longest running play in the world.
And now when people talk about Broadway, all they think about are lavish Walt Disney productions. Occasionally, will bring somebody in from Hollywood to star in Eugene O'Neill or something for 6 weeks, and that's it. There's a couple of musicals that'll come back from time to time. But you and I are about the same age, and I think we can probably both recall multiple times in the last several decades where people said Broadway is coming back. But I don't think Broadway is back to what it used to be, where there would be many writers such as yourself out there writing plays, producing plays. People would be going out to them, and you'd pick up your newspaper the next morning, and they'd be talking about reviews about how great it was or how bad it was. And Broadway is a very, very different animal now. Am I right there, or?
I think you're very much right about that. I was told by an acquaintance who was a Broadway producer that Broadway is very expensive real estate. A two-hander, a play which requires only 2 actors, is a minimum of $3 million to mount.
Wow.
So when you think about what you do for a big box musical, a Wicked or a Jersey Boys, it's costing a lot more to mount that, but it has the feel-good factor that can bring in a much greater profit. And I think that smaller plays, and there are smaller theaters in New York. I've had plays done at a couple smaller theaters in New York. Smaller theaters have more room to play with things like that, but they don't have the same cachet when it comes to reviews and getting people involved and um, generating a lot of interest to make the play a smash success. So it's expensive real estate, and it's hard to get people to sign on for that.
You know, we should talk with you someday about maybe producing one of your plays here in Second Life.
Oh, I'd be delighted for that. That's
It's been done. I mean, over the years that I've been in World, I've seen people um, either they'll try their hand at Shakespeare. Some people produce their own productions. Um, we should talk about that after the show.
sure. No, that sounds like a terrific idea because I've been thinking about adapting some of my plays to radio format. I'm considering starting a podcast,
Hmm.
and I was thinking of that because my new publisher, SEG Publishing, when they took over my mystery series, they hired me to do the audiobooks. And so over the past year, I went through three novels. We did 3 rounds of editing on each novel. And then I recorded the audiobooks and I learned how to use the software. I learned how to edit and other things. And I thought, well, I've got like 75 or 80 published short stories. I'd love to do a podcast that just published stories or that just presented stories. I wouldn't have to be up with current events. All I'd need to do is read the story.
Well,
And I thought a few of my plays might work for that too. So I'm open. I'm very much open to those suggestions.
we should talk later because it's a great way also to produce your books and your backlist. And as I segue into your books, how different is it writing a book versus a play? And do you have a preference?
Uh, I don't have a preference in that when I write, I want to get a story done. There's something I want to take care of, a story I want to tell. And the question I have to ask myself each time is whether the story is a play, a novel, or a short story. Because how I answer that question will determine what I write. Now, the average novel is 80 to 90,000 words long, and the average play is between 18 and 25,000 words long. So you're looking at a quarter to a third of the size for a play as opposed to a novel. So there are limits you have in theater. For example, most theaters today, when you're looking at smaller theaters around the country, unless you're talking about the big box musical that's pioneered in New York, done in New York, and then everybody picks up on it and does it later, as for community theater from high schools, what have you. When you get past that, what you're looking at is theaters that request no more than five, sometimes 6 or 7 actors in a production before they'll consider a new play. And that becomes its own difficulty. And people come to me frequently with, how can I get this put on stage? And they'll bring a novel or a screenplay or what have you. I had a woman recently let me read a screenplay. It was a good enough screenplay, and I thought she should still market it, but she wanted to adapt it to the stage. The trouble was she had like 30 characters, and we don't do Inherit the Wind anymore, except that it was done in the past and it's tradition. Nobody puts out plays that have that many people unless you're talking about a musical with a fairly complex chorus line. So that becomes harder to market when you're dealing with smaller theaters around the country.
So, we're talking about marketing, and it's something that is a recurring theme with many of our guests who are writers on the
Hmm.
show, having to market their books. Um, One of the questions I always ask my guests is, the full-time writer, is he or she becoming extinct except for the megastars? When I look at the books that are promoted by the four remaining publishing houses, I should probably check to make sure they didn't merge further this afternoon. Um, it seems that you see the same names, Patterson, King, Rowling is popular, and there are several others who seem to get the attention. When I talk to writers and their agents, they tell me that those are the ones who get the budgets for travel, pre-pandemic, when they would do book tours and things. But for everybody else, it's just a scramble. They're expecting everybody to market themselves.
Yes, it very much is a scramble because what happens, even when you're dealing with a larger house, when you are dealing with a mega best-selling author, that author sucks up money from other writers under the same roof. My favorite example of that is there's a novel called Full Cleveland. It's part of a mystery series done by Les Roberts, who lives in Cleveland. He used to be a TV writer and then moved back to Cleveland at some point in his retirement, and he writes mysteries now. Well, Full Cleveland was a good mystery novel, and it was published the same year. It was published by St. Martin's the same year St. Martin's published Silence of the Lambs. Guess who got the advertising money?
Yeah, I think I know
Guess
what.
who got the extra runs? Guess who got the movie deal and all the other stuff? Because the publisher is looking for somebody that ultimately supports the whole enterprise with mega bestsellers. And I have done writing workshops for years, and I tell students or participants in those workshops, do not look at this. I know you've read the story of the person whose spouse saved a manuscript. Tabitha King saving Carrie, for example, and it made Stephen King a star. That story is rare in and of itself. Um, we publish about 330,000 books a year, if my last numbers, if I am correct in finding that. And I did read somewhere that an average of 219 books make it to the New York Times bestseller list. Jeff Markowitz from our chapter told me he was in Buffalo for a program I put together, and he said the average book sells 500 copies or less. So you're not writing because you're going to get rich. You get a little money, and that's okay. You get a little attention, maybe some awards, maybe interviews like this, and you can say to yourself justifiably, I am a writer. But the idea of getting rich and having the writing solve your problems is fairly remote. I had a woman some years ago give me a novel to read, and I read it and I critiqued it for her because that was part of our deal, and I raised questions. And she was rather upset that I asked questions like, at one point, for example, there was a scorpion in a bathroom, and the woman, the main character, is giving the baby a bath, sees the scorpion, panics, pulls the baby out, calls the husband, says we had to move to this state, and gives him hell about that. And then they go on and have another chapter the next day, the next morning, whatever. And I put a marginal note: what happened to the scorpion? And I think she was upset by that because I believe this person she was counting on this book to make her a mint, and to my knowledge, it didn't, because most books don't. I'm happy for a little money when I sell a book. I sell a title, I sell a short story. I'm happy for a little money. I mean, it might be 25 or 50 or $100 for a story. It might be 80 or $100 in a royalty check for book sales over a period of a couple months. That's fine. That's fine because I'm not trying to get rich. I don't live as if I'm rich and I'm trying to catch up with that. I live fairly modestly. So,
Yeah, so it sounds like the full-time writer is going the way of the dodo bird.
it will become a privilege. It is the privilege of having, in my case, I consider myself a full-time writer now. I've been retired from the university for 8 years, going on 9. I consider myself a full-time writer, but I don't write full-time. I mean, I
Mhm.
usually write 3 to 4 hours a day. I do some research and so forth. And I did when I first retired, I wrote longer periods during the day. But as I've gotten older, I've slowed down some. I found that, when you get older, you develop health issues, and those take time. So I'm putting in probably 3 or 4 hours a day writing, and that includes pretty much everything: research, proofing, all the other stuff that goes with it, and making a modest income from it. Um, so I'm not full time in the traditional sense. I'm not doing what Isaac Asimov once did to help him write 540 books. He decided he needed to write 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, and did, and turned out um, a lot of books. Many of them classics. The Robots of Dawn, for example, is a science fiction murder mystery dealing with the laws of robotics. Excellent book, excellent read. But then other things that Asimov wrote were not as well received. They weren't as good. It's just that volume became the issue for him.
Didn't he die slumped over his typewriter, if I recall correctly?
Now that I don't know. I know Robert B. Parker did. I don't know whether Asimov did.
I thought I read that, but yeah, those, you know, Parker, Asimov, they were a different generation of writers. It was a
Yes.
different world. When you talk about that, the sci-fi of the 40s and the 50s, even going back into the 30s, um, the publishing was a very different animal then. I mean, you probably could have walked all over Manhattan and bumped into publishers and agents all over the place.
Yes. Well,
Publishers.
back then, agents worked for you. I mean,
Mhm.
your agent sold not only your novel to Random House, he also sold your, you know, 3,000 word short story to Saturday Evening Post. But of course, an agent, and back then agents were getting like 10%. So
Mhm.
10% of $100 story sale is nothing if you can get 15% of an $11 million advance, which I think I read Stephen King got once. Well, if you're going to get 15% of 11 million, why are you going to bother trying to market this guy's story to a small fiction market? It's
Well, yeah, and the small fiction market is, pretty much, gone
it's
away.
right. It's pretty much shot. When I first started writing, okay, I'm 70 years old now. I started writing when I was 10. I started trying to sell when I was 13. My mom took us to a library one Saturday, and I picked up Ray Bradbury's R's for Rocket, which I thought was beautifully written, and decided I wanted to be a writer. My dad responded by giving me his old typewriter, and I thought, cool, I'm on my way. I learned to type, and I started trying to sell stories. I didn't sell one until I was 18. I didn't sell a second story till I was 27. And since that point, I've been pretty consistent selling short fiction and getting plays produced, and later novels. So, so I've been working at it for a long, long time.
You must have seen a lot of change over the years.
Yes, the most regrettable change is the absence of the rejection slip. Now, I wrote an article for a writer's journal many years ago called Coping with Rejection. And I think it started with a line: I got a rejection slip yesterday, and I explained how it ruined my day. Well, nowadays, people don't even bother rejecting you. You send something out and you never hear from them. I've taken to, when I get a rejection slip, I write a thank you note because, again, I was raised to be polite. And
Good for you.
wow, thank you that you actually responded to the story, because you're you're operating in a void so often. You don't know how your story's been received, whether it's been received. And curiously enough, I'm sure I'm not the only person this has happened to. I had a story rejected by a magazine that didn't send me a rejection slip, and I completely forgot that I had sent a story to them. And then later they bought the story that they had earlier rejected because they can't keep track of stuff either. Um, and I think I found that rejection slip later, and I thought they rejected this, but they bought the story for 25 bucks. Go me. I got 25 bucks out of the deal.
Well,
It's just one of those things
yeah,
where it's hard to keep track of.
good kudos to you. But then, it's probably, publishing like corporate America now. You've got such turnover with staff.
Well,
Guy,
there is that.
the guy who rejected it was probably long gone by the time it came back next time. It's, just the way the world works these days.
Well, you're right about that. I One of the reasons I turned to writing plays was that my first novel was an historical novel called Blackbird Rising. It's set in Buffalo in 1901 during the Pan American Exposition, or World's Fair, at which William McKinley was assassinated. I had a dream one night and decided to do the research and write this, and it became my first novel. Um, we raised I had an agent at that point. I don't have one now, but we got quite a bit of interest at one of the 6 large companies, and I'm not going to mention which one it was. And the editor who wanted the book suggested changes and gave me what this was like the beginning of May. He said, "I'll give you 6 weeks," which was great because I'm university faculty. Beginning of May, I'm packing up for the summer, so I had time to write. I said, "Great." And then I did all the changes he requested and resubmitted the book, only to discover he had been let go, and the person who took his place wasn't interested in that book.
Unfortunate. Unfortunately, there's that's the way of the world these days.
Yes.
Nothing is permanent. It when you read the lives of writers, people like Steinbeck, Hemingway, from back in the day, the
Hmm.
publishing world was a small world. People were in there forever, and nobody was making big money either. Uh,
No.
but there was a sense of camaraderie. It wasn't a perfect world. It was biased. It was male oriented, but
Hmm.
it was a different sense about it, which unfortunately I think we've lost over the years.
Well, I think we have because without gatekeepers of some sort, um, we are just totally flooded, and that becomes problematic when you're trying to decide what to read. Is this worth my time to read? If it's on the New York Times bestseller list, oh, well, that sounds like it's a book I might enjoy because a lot of people are reading it. Getting reviews from outlets, take a look at how newspapers have fared. The my I have 4 novels published. They've been published by a small presses. I have 3 collections of short stories that I printed. I did print on demand myself, but I didn't publish the stories unpublished. They were previously published stories that I collected, so I'd have them in a single volume, or in this case, it's become 3 volumes. And I wouldn't do that with a novel because it hasn't been vetted. A play, I could do that because a play goes through a workshop. Then it goes through production, which means it will have the fingerprints of cast members, the producer, the director, people who are tweaking things one way or another. There's a collaborative effort there. So I don't have a problem with something that's gone through a vetting process coming out that way. But in terms of novels, it's hard to do that when people are cranking them out, um, and just publishing them because they can. Uh,
That that
that, that's a problem.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and it's something I also wanted to talk to you about. Is as you quite rightly pointed out, newspapers are going away. Going away. They're becoming dinosaurs. The few that remain, the idea of having full-time book reviewers, let alone a full-time mystery book reviewer, uh, is well past. I think the New York Times may be the last one in the country, or
And, and I think you're right. And I think that's actually the point I was going to make because the uh, the the first 2 books of um, print on demand stories, I actually got reviews in newspapers
Mhm.
because the stories have been published elsewhere. And now getting reviews um, in the last 10 years because of the newspapers are letting their book reviewers go. In fact, a couple of the reviewers at the Buffalo News, who've since retired, are friends of mine, and they don't get to write reviews anymore. The newspaper um, sources reviews from other papers like WAPO or the Times, and so if you get a review, it's of a book that was published this past week or past month, and that review appeared in a large market newspaper or a large market magazine, and um, you don't get attention for the smaller books, the smaller print runs.
Yeah, it's incredible how the world has changed because of the internet. Uh,
Yes,
we, on one hand, it's killing off journalism. We're seeing, we're paying the price in this country for the consolidation of the media into fewer hands. Uh,
yes.
we're losing, as you quite correctly pointed out, the filters, the editors, the content. And then on the flip side, you've got this open floodgate of self-published material that's coming out. And
Mhm.
Some of it is actually pretty good. A lot of it is junk. Uh,
Yes.
I subscribe to a couple of services that let me know on a daily basis of free or near free books, and I pick some up from time to time that strike my interest. Some of them, I got to admit, these writers are good. They've got good characters, good storytelling. They're never going to go anywhere, just the nature of the market. Others, you get the first chapter, and it's like, okay, that was a mistake, even if it was free. And
Yeah.
there are people who are setting up blogs and websites to review books. We've had Christopher Zagorski on
Hmm.
our show. He's an Edgar Award winner, Raven Award winner for his work. Julianne Love will be with us next year, talking about her work, and she's another Raven Award winner from the Edgars. I think that in time we may have this group of independent reviewers out there, but I still think we're in the very formative stages here, and it's still too soon to tell which way it's going to go because these folks have full-time day jobs too.
Yes. Yes, I'm reminded that lots of writers traditionally have. Raymond Chandler, for example, worked for, I believe, Standard Oil
Yes.
while he was writing his Philip Marlowe mysteries, and that becomes a recurring theme that you have to pay the bills. You have, you got to feed your kids and keep a roof over your family's head and all that other stuff. And for many of us, for years, that has been the purpose of teaching or writing for a newspaper, or in many cases for something that had absolutely nothing to do with writing, scholarship, or creative work. And so you're right. We're getting to a point now where there's so much, we're having trouble making things matter, making them count. And so when people do have a chance to appear somewhere and talk somewhere, it gives them an opportunity to spread some information. My books, for example, are one of the biggest chunks of a market for my books are people I went to high school with, who knew when I was writing when I was a kid. And a number of my high school classmates have written nice online reviews of the Nickel City books, and I've even seen some exchanges. Do you know who Gideon is based on? I think I know, and so forth. And of course, Gideon's more inspired by my son, who is an Iraq War vet and a former cop, than by anybody they knew, including me. But um, but it becomes interesting to have that kind of interest generated and have people follow your work that way. But that becomes almost accidental. Now, I'd love to get that on a larger scale, um, but it is what it is. You're not going to get that much attention. The average person who reads, and I read this statistic years ago, and it broke my heart. I was still teaching when I read this. The average person who reads an average of 2 books a year.
Well, I hate to say this, but I know people who are very close to me, and don't worry, I won't mention your names in public, who they haven't read a book in years.
Yeah,
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 and
I know people who are like that too.
it's sad. I mean, I try to read in a good year. I'm upwards of 40 to 50 books plus a whole.
That's a good rate. You're doing, say, a book a week or a little less. And when I was working full time, I was reading every chance I get, and I would put away typically about 100 books a year, which is to say 2 books a week. Since I retired and I'm writing more and I'm relaxing more, I probably am down to 70 to 100 books a year. So it's less than a book. It's a little more than a book a week, not quite two. But then I realized I've been reading since I was a teenager. I've been reading for a lot of other people. It's time they
Gary,
picked up their own slack.
Gary, you and I are keeping the American publishing industry alive.
Yes.
Yeah. So you guys out there who publish the books, you should thank us. Send us a few books in the mail. I probably shouldn't have said that, but anyway, it's Second Life. Hey, let's talk about your books for a little while here, Gary. The
Okay.
Nickel series, Gideon Rhymes. You've said, the main character is probably based on your son, and I know you're from the Buffalo area. What
Yes.
what got you started, and how much of you and your life are in these books?
Well, the one thing I find with writing fiction is that there's a sliver of me in every character I create, good or bad. Because that character will have some trait or some characteristic that demonstrates his or her humanity, and it's something that I thought of along the way. My life is perhaps skims the edges of the series. Um, for example, my detective has a partner who is a Latina lawyer. My better half is Latina, so there's a parallel. The and his he had he was in Iraq and was nearly, well, he has a Purple Heart. Um, my son was wounded in Iraq. My son also told a story once when he was in Mosul, coming out of the latrine seconds before a mortar hit it. And when he said, when you just had a dump and you missed by less than 30 seconds being blown up, it changes your perspective on a lot of things. So I don't deal with much in the way of war flashbacks or things like that. There are references here and there, and most of that stuff comes from stuff my son told me. My son and I have a very good relationship. His first firefight when he was in Iraq, he called me on a sat phone and said, "Dad, I killed people today and I have to talk about it." I said, "I'm here." And that's not what any of us really wants to have to do, but
Yeah.
my son was hurting and needed to be able to express that.
Yeah.
And so I was there for him. But I try to deal with Buffalo both in a real sense and in an idealized sense. In my books, the first four books, I'm working on book four now. The mayor of Buffalo is a woman named um, Ophelia Green. Buffalo's current mayor is a friend of mine. His name is Byron Brown. Okay. And I was joking with him at one point. I said, "Well, I gave Buffalo a woman mayor." And he said, "I couldn't even be the governor." And in that first book, I inserted the reference to Governor Brown at some point. So it's there. But I want to keep things fictional in that sense. I'm not trying to capture real life, but I do try to present the problems that Buffalo has as a post-industrial city. And I think that the setting of a mystery is, when it's done well, is almost another character. Um, I was particularly fond of, well, if take a look at Mike Hammer's New York, take a look at Maltese Falcon's portrayal of San Francisco. Take a look at the Spencer novels and how they portrayed Boston. I always envisioned, when I was starting out to try a mystery novel, I always envisioned having my hometown as a character in the books. And so I use a lot of restaurants that are in Buffalo. I have, you know, I if I write a scene in your restaurant, I will pass a chapter to you. I usually don't put scenes of violence in restaurants. That's where they're enjoying food, because we have terrific restaurants in Buffalo. And the very first restaurant I did that with is now out of business. It was run by one of my high school classmates who had every right to retire herself. But I started doing that thinking, well, I'm using real places, real hotels, real restaurants, real theaters, and then I will fictionalize something if I need to have something overly dramatic happen there. But I'm trying to give people a sense of the town. Buffalo is not the snowbelt city that it is often portrayed. Other parts of New York State, for example, Syracuse, have worse snow. Buffalo's considered, oh, there's so much snow, and it really has not been that great the last number of years. But there are other things that Buffalo has that people don't know about. For example, before the pandemic, Buffalo had about 30 theater companies. We had enough theater companies that we have regional theater awards here, for writing, for acting, directing, technical stuff, production. We have regional theater awards that are fairly well respected, because we have a large, in and not just the city but the surrounding counties. So we have something in the vicinity of 30 theater companies. Now, a few of them have folded with the pandemic, but the companies are There are a couple strong African American multicultural companies. There are a couple that stick to new plays. We have Shakespeare in the Park, which sticks to Shakespeare and doesn't even do Shakespeare's contemporaries. I'd been pushing for them to do Volpone, but they want to stick to Shakespeare. We have and Ben Johnson's Volpone. That's the old English professor talking in. And I've talked to I've been involved with 6 or 7 of the theater companies in the area, and it's a wonderful theater environment. Absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, I find that, like you, some of the best mysteries that are written capture the character of their
Yes.
local city. I've read some mysteries where it was a good storyline, but the city could have been any place. And I think the worst ones are American writers who just suddenly decide that they're going to write a mystery in Paris or London, and maybe they were there once for 2 weeks on a vacation.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, there's one author I know, and I won't mention him online, and he does a very good job of capturing his small American city. It's so good, in fact, that while he normally uses real places like you do, restaurants, hotels, public facilities, there's one small, intimate bar come restaurant that he has his main characters and their friends hang out in.
Hmm.
Written the story so well, people go to this city looking for that bar come restaurant.
Yes.
They're so disappointed to find out, look, folks, I'm sorry, I just made it up for the story, for just like you did. He didn't want to have these kinds of scenes taking place in somebody else's place of business.
One of the most famous bar restaurants in Buffalo is the Anchor Bar, which is the nominal home of the chicken wing. And I say nominal because chicken wings developed in Buffalo along 2 different paths. One was my old neighborhood, the east side of Buffalo, with John Young's Wings and Things, and the other was the Anchor Bar, wherein um, the story is told that the owners one night had only scraps of wings left over and had to put together a meal for somebody who was coming in, and thus wings were born. Now, I don't know if both stories are true or both stories are apocryphal, and they could well both be true. But I do know that's a source of pride. John Young's is gone, has long been gone, but the Anchor Bar is still there and it has branches. And so it bills itself as the home of the chicken wing. Well, the very first scene in the very first Gideon Rhymes novel, Nickel City Blues, takes place in the Anchor Bar. And there's a standoff that happens at that point, and I didn't want to have any violence happen in the bar. Well, after the book came out, there was actually a murder just outside the bar from someone who worked there. It's like, wow. I'm not trying to spread violence in any particular place. We have wonderful food here, and I love the food in Buffalo. One thing you will never do is starve in Buffalo. Um, because we have such a great array of food. And I had a Nickel City short story published in Mystery Tribune a couple of years ago. And in that story, Gideon Rhymes takes a child who was under DACA and
Mhm.
takes him back to Ohio and ends up solving a murder there. Well, the kid takes him to a pizza parlor, and Rhymes says, like most Buffalo residents, I was a pizza snob. Most places um, outside of Buffalo where they feature pizza, it's like a ring of cardboard with ketchup and Velveeta. And we have, and many people will say this, friends, family who come in, and people who've come in for conferences and other things, and I take them to the Anchor Bar, I take them for Buffalo pizza. I've never had pizza like this. I'm telling you, it's the best pizza on the planet. So, I mean, I do try to put those kinds of things in in the books, so that people get a sense. And one thing there's a lot of is Tim Hortons coffee, because Tim Hortons is a chain and it's in many parts of the Northeast, but we have a Tim Horton on every fifth corner around here. And so my characters are frequently doing the drive-through to get Tim Hortons coffee because their creator frequently does the drive-through to get Tim Hortons coffee.
I have to get back up to Buffalo. I haven't been
Oh,
there in
absolutely. And
years.
you come up and I'll show you a good time. We will take you interesting places for live entertainment, live theater, and great food.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully, and by the way, folks in the audience, Gary's in charge of programs for the New York chapter of MWA, and he's working to have a series of events out in that part of the state, and many of us hope to join him, hopefully this year or next year at the latest, at these events. So tune in.
Yeah, I'm thinking this coming year. I think these whatever wave of the pandemic we're in now, is it third, fourth, fifth wave? Every time we turn
Well,
around, suddenly it's surging. I think that'll limit things, but I'm hoping by 2022 we can be on track with programming.
I hope so too. I mean, I've only met you in Zoom sessions and in Second Life. I would like to meet you in the flesh.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, what are the challenges that you're facing yourself as a writer, Gary? And just not related to the pandemic, but being a writer in general.
Um, some days the words make themselves hard to come, and that's always been the case from the time I was a kid, trying to figure out what to say next. Sometimes the words have a hard time coming. Other days they come beautifully. And for me, the biggest challenge, well, when I was younger and I had a young family and um I had kids to feed and homework to do and students to mentor and faculty to mentor and other stuff, my writing took the last spot, and I would stay up late at night writing. I don't write late at night often anymore. I usually write in the morning, somewhere between 9 and 1, and so part of the issue now is getting up and getting all the kinks worked out of my body, my aging body, so that I can sit for a while and do that. So those challenges have always been the same, coming up with something and then making it work. But then um, there's no feeling like a finished piece that goes somewhere, gets published or performed. It becomes an accomplishment. So for me, it's like, how can I make this the best possible piece? And again, I decide what the story should be. Should it be a play? Because if it's a play, I'm going to wind up with a limited number of characters. Should it be a short story? And again, we're talking a limited number of characters. I did a workshop once where somebody wrote a 16-page story that had 25 characters. And I said, you're not taking time to develop characters if you do this. We don't know who these people are. You're just getting Mrs. Smith over in the corner. Now, that may be all that was necessary for her role, but if you have too many roles like that, nobody's going to care about the people. So trying to get people that readers will resonate with, that they will like or dislike or fear, is is a driving thing for me. Also, in as much as I'm African American, I have devoted a lot of my theater writing to matters that are relevant to African Americans. For example, my Edgar Award winning play, Matter of Intent, is a courtroom drama set in Buffalo in 1960. It examines the failure of the insanity defense for defendants of color. And it has several twists and turns that I think the Edgar Committee must have liked. My ex-wife and I went to New York to for the Edgar Awards for that after it was nominated, and then when they announced the winner, she looked at me and said, "Now do you believe it's a good play?" And I can never tell with my own work whether it's good or bad. I will depend on other people. I mean, I've had plays that I thought were brilliant, or stories I thought were brilliant, and somebody came along and popped them with a balloon very quickly, and that happens, and that's okay, because you can't think you're flawless. You need to have other eyes on your work.
True.
So
Quite true.
so yeah, I've done that. So I think I've had 9 plays produced, most of them produced first in Buffalo, a couple not though. I have one play that's never been done in Buffalo, and I'm wishing somebody would do it. It's a mystery play. Um, and then 4 novels and probably 75 or 80 short stories, not to mention all the scholarly stuff I had to do to get tenure way back when, and then all the um, op-ed pieces I write, because I'm not shy about my opinions. But as a theater writer, I have addressed many options or many experiences. Um, I have put together, again, this is a print on demand thing of 4 plays that have been produced. It's called Shadows and Mirrors, and it is a collection of 4 African American suspense plays. Matter of Intent, the one I mentioned, The Scavenger's Daughter,
Okay.
The Mark of Cain, and The Trial of Trayvon Martin. Each one of those looks at some aspect of African American life and makes a murder mystery out of it. For example, The Trial of Trayvon Martin flips the script and asks the question, the what if is, what would have happened if the other guy had died that night? And Trayvon Martin ended up in the criminal justice system. The Mark of Cain is inspired by the Ossian Sweet trials of Clarence Darrow. In 1925, when a black doctor in Detroit bought a home in a white neighborhood, on the second night, the house was attacked by a mob of 5 to 700. Someone inside the house fired a gun. Somebody outside died, and all the adults in the house were charged with murder. The NAACP engaged Clarence Darrow, fresh off the Scopes trial, to defend the family. And so the Mark of Cain, and the doctor's name is not Ossian Sweet, but Ossian Cain. The Mark of Cain is an examination of that. And I'm proud that we did that in Buffalo, and it won our regional theater award for best new play. It also was done at the Castillo Theater in New York City, which made me happy. The Scavenger's Daughter, which was first done as a reading at Urban Stages in New York, is a story about Alzheimer's affecting an African American family. It could be done by anybody with script tweaks, but it's specifically African American because my intention was to show African Americans as folks like anybody else who have other issues. You know, it's not that, oh, life has been so hard to me and unfair because I'm black. That's one issue, but when your dad has Alzheimer's and can't remember who you are, an experience I know all too well, that becomes another matter. So those plays deal with such issues. I have taken commissions. I wrote a play called The Guns of Christmas that was intended to be intended to take a look at the Christmas truces that happened in 1914 along the trench line in World War One for Christmas Eve. British, German, French soldiers, they put down their guns and stopped shooting each other for one night for Christmas Eve. Now, there's a French film, Joyeux Noël, which deals with this. But I wrote drama that, and actually I ended up directing it about that truce. It's called The Guns of Christmas. It doesn't fall into other categories. I have 2 plays coming up. Let's see. One of those plays is called Stoker's Guest. The first chapter of Dracula was cut by the publisher to save space, and later Stoker's widow Florence published it as the lead story in a collection of stories, and it was called Dracula's Guest. Well, my play is called Stoker's Guest. It's about the trip Stoker took in 1890 that resulted in his producing Dracula. He went to the town of Whitby on the North Sea and was inspired to write Dracula. And so I turned that into a thriller. And another play that I've written that will be, and these should both be produced in 2022, it's called Split Wit. And it's a murder mystery that deals with a witness to a murder who suffers from a severed corpus callosum, the bundle of nerve fibers that connects the two halves of the brain. When the corpus callosum is severed, the brain functions as 2 separate organs. And so what you see with one side of your brain, you can't find the language for in another side. And so this person has witnessed something but can't find the words to explain what he saw. And his detective has to figure out how to get him to reveal that. And a side note that's a nice note is the detective is Maxine Travis, who was the detective investigating the shooting in The Scavenger's Daughter, the Alzheimer's play. And I moved her into the third Gideon Rhymes novel. I transferred her from Syracuse to Buffalo, made her a homicide detective because I wanted somebody else there. Plus, my original publisher, um, I wasn't sure what was happening. They went through some business changes, and I thought if I end up losing this series because nobody will publish subsequent books, at least I can spin off and start doing Maxine Travis mysteries. And so I'm keeping her around as a character. Well, she's the detective in the play Split Wit. So
You've got a broad portfolio of work there. It's incredible. Now, I know your books are out there on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. They're Nook. Are your plays out there as well?
yes, the plays are out. Again, when the plays have been produced, then I put them out in in volumes. Like for example, the Guns of Christmas is available. Um, the uh, the four plays I mentioned, Under Shadows and Mirrors, the Mark of Cain, the Matter of Intent, the Trial of Trayvon Martin, and the Scavenger's Daughter. Those are in a single volume, but they are also published individually. So I put the plays out as well. Now the new plays won't be published until after they've gone through the process of being produced,
Okay.
because there's no point in doing that. But the plays are available, and some of them are available for free online for places that look for plays, like the New Play Exchange. I'm registered with them, Pro Play, and I've had my plays picked up in other cities because of sites like that. And I was going to tell you, I do have the distinction of having had both Matter of Intent and The Scavenger's Daughter made into motion pictures, not in America, but in
Oh,
India.
okay.
And again, the Alzheimer's story works just as well for an immigrant Indian family as it does for an African American family. And so they adapted Scavenger's Daughter into, and I particularly like the Scavenger's Daughter more so than State versus Malti Bahasky, which is their adaptation of Matter of Intent. And I mean, they don't pay what Hollywood pays. You know, I think Hollywood would pay something like $40,000 for film rights or something like that, and they paid like 1,700 per script. But when that happened, the front sewer had collapsed, and I needed the money, so it was it was timely. Trust me,
It's cash. Hey,
it was
so
exactly.
Gary, what trends do you see ahead in the mystery publishing industry because of the pandemic? Are we ever going to go back to normal, whatever that might have been?
I don't know. I know that I was talking with Tim O'Mara at one point, and it may have been at an MWA meeting, one of the things we were doing online, when he said he has no intention of addressing the pandemic in his next book. I'm addressing the pandemic. I have a series, and I am the pandemic is killing off a couple of my characters and becomes a point in the plot of the book that I'm working on now. I don't think we can avoid it. I know a lot of people are going to do stuff with the pandemic. The pandemic's not going to be the main focus of the book, but it is going to be there because it's part of real life. And I say that because I lost family and friends to that thing. My best friend's wife, my sister's husband. I mean, it's been an awful thing. Many of my friends in the theater community, in the local theater community, succumbed to COVID-19.
I'm sorry.
Um, it's just been an awful year and a half with this stuff, and I can't just look away from it. I gotta address it. And
I, I,
so
I
go ahead.
that's right. I understand. I understand why you're saying that. And I ask these questions because we had the great influenza about 100 years ago,
Hmm.
and I was probably well into high school, college, before I became aware that we had the influenza back then. Uh, I had relatives who crossed the ocean during World War One, were
Hmm.
worried about being sunk by U-boats, and they would talk about life in the old country. Going through Dublin after the Troubles when it was being shelled by the British Army, arriving in New York, uh, but nobody ever talked about the the great influenza. My parents, one who grew up in the old country, grew up here in America, we would talk about all the things that you could find in the history books, but nobody ever mentioned it. And if you look at a lot of the literature from that time, at least the ones I've come across, I never saw any references. Now, last few years before our own current pandemic. A couple of history books have been written, but it
Hmm.
seems like there was a collective will to forget whatever happened
Hmm.
years ago. And I wonder if, while you're going to be writing about it in your books, Tim isn't going to be writing about it in his. I'd be interested to see in 10 years if we're going to have these continual references to the pandemic in our work.
Well, I think history will always get passed on somehow, some way by somebody. And you said we're in the same age category, and that's true. And I first learned about this flu when I was about 15. Um, I used to do things like shovel snow for neighbors, my elderly neighbors, and things like that. And so I had lots of adoptive grandparents on my street. Even after I was fully adult, my own children and so forth, and I would take the train to work, I would see people that I was a little kid for. And they, is that you, Gary? Yes, it is. How are you? And you know, I had one of my neighbors, my next door neighbor, a woman for whom I had done a lot of work over the years. She was probably one of the closest people to our family in the neighborhood. She was like a second grandmother. Um, she told me about the flu when I was 15. She said, "Yeah, there was that big flu epidemic." I hadn't heard anything about it. My history class hadn't mentioned it. And I asked my history teacher about it 2 years later when I was a senior, and he did mention, he talked about it a little. But she said to me, I lost three children in that flu
Wow,
on the same day.
wow.
And I thought, how do you get over that? How do you deal with that? So later, when I was in college and I was doing a history course, I one of the history courses, actually several of the courses with the same professor, had the theme history from the bottom up, history from the lives of average ordinary people. And so I looked for a research project and ended up doing one on the flu epidemic of 1918. And what I found was that in New York City, in October of 1918, people were dying at the rate of an average of 800 per day from the flu, that coffins were stacked outside the cemeteries. Well, when I wrote The Mark of Cain, which I wrote it probably in 2012, 2013, and it was produced in 2016. When I wrote The Mark of Cain, which was set in 1925, my main character was a doctor who recalled the Spanish flu and was able to talk about what happened there. I was able to bring that home because that knowledge was in my head. And I think history will always be passed on by somebody and acted upon by somebody. So I don't think we're in danger of forgetting it. I think, and I think Tim's well within his rights to say, I don't want to deal with this. And I think those of us who think I have to deal with this, I have to because I lost people, I have to address this, will do it.
And that's every writer, every artist right in their work.
Yes.
We're coming to the end of our show, and I would like to thank you for joining us this evening. It has been a wonderfully informative discussion, and
Thank you for having me, Con.
hope to have you back when you start, when your next book comes out, or your next production, or just in the neighborhood.
Sure.
Uh, and For folks out there who are listening, I really would encourage you to pick up Gary's books. They're available on Amazon, on Barnes and Noble, all the other leading sites, and well worth the time and money to read. I'd just like to say to everybody before we go that this is going to be our last show in the 6 p.m. Second Life time uh, going forward. Next month, starting on Monday, October 18th, we will be at noon Second Life time going forward, 3 o'clock Eastern time for those of you on the East Coast. Uh, Same venue, same place. Our next guest is going to be Dick Belsky, an award-winning mystery writer. Dick also used to be the city editor for the New York Post back in the 70s, so he's got some great stories about Son of Sam and the great blackout 77, so we're looking forward to having him. I'd like to thank Gary again for being with us here this evening, and I'd like to thank everyone who's been supporting the show. Putting on a show like this isn't easy, and we only do it once a month because we've got limited resources in terms of staff. But if anybody is out there who is interested, who would like to work with us and help in getting the show ready, designing avatars, helping in the video production or the promotion, please contact me either in Second Life, or you can contact me at my email address at conpsweeney@somedi.com. That's SOMEDDI.com. So with that, I'd like to say good night, stay safe, and I hope to see you all again in the future.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Isabel,